here we are with John. I'm sorry that it's raining right now. I hope it's not affecting the sound. We got good microphones here. But this is part 2. And John, I was asked, you said you've been married many times. Do you have any children?
Yes, I do, Mark.
And where are your children?
They're scattered to many different countries.
Yeah?
I would say the South Pacific, Europe, and America.
Do you keep in touch with
and
any?
Asia, too.
You keep in touch with any of them?
Very seldom I do.
Yeah?
Seldom, yeah. I just heard from my beautiful daughter just a few days ago. She's in the Greek islands of Santorini.
Okay.
She loves the Greek islands.
I've been there.
With my grandchildren.
We got grandchildren too. Yeah. Good for you.
Yes, Mark. Our blood must be carried by the swell of time, breaking celestially on an infinite line. Existence equals spark.
So, tell me again when you first came to the Philippines and.
It was back quite a way back, Mark. It was in 1959.
Where did you go? What city? Do you remember?
Manila.
Manila?
Cebu. Yeah. And around Asia. Yep. And we always went to Yokohama. And then it was Korea. And then all different places in Japan. I stayed in Japan for a while. Lived in Japan for a while. And I was living with a beautiful bar girl there. And I had no, move a little bit over. I had no, I experienced the Japanese culture, the Korean culture, the Filipino culture, the Chinese culture, and the Indonesian culture, and the Papua New Guinea culture.
Oh, wow.
And I will tell you that each one had a beautiful had a beauty to it.
And so all of them, for some reason, you chose the Philippines. Why in particular?
No, I didn't choose the Philippines.
You didn't choose the Philippines?
No, not originally. No. Originally, I liked the Chinese culture, Taiwan. Spent time in Taiwan, the mountains of Taiwan, the southern part, Kaohsiung, Orchard Island in the very south, Taruko Gorge, and the beauty of Sun Moon Lake, and then Peitao. Peitao was memorable because there you could be in a beautiful Chinese house, and there was a little brook running through the room with all this teak furniture, black mahogany teak furniture, and you had an opium bed there, and the teak furniture, the black teak furniture, the moving fan, the slow moving fan, and then no air conditioning, you didn't need it, and that little brook going through the room, and you could hear it running, and you had a beautiful Chinese girl that you would be enraptured with. And she would take you into another dimension, Mark. You were flying right. You had beautiful legs wrapped around you, and you had the Chinese music, which was traditional, but the brook was very symbolic because you were in harmony with nature, the beauty of the essence of the body of a beautiful Chinese girl, and to know this, to experience this, and to appreciate this is all part of the great journey of life. And I suggest that you go and read a book called The Great Adventure.
The Great Adventure, okay.
And you read that book someday and then tell me what you think of it. I'm not going to go into that. So, but that was only one one incident because I could not go into China and do as the coasters, the old China coasters that I met had lived in China, different ports all along China. They grab a ship now and take another because China became under Mao locked down in the 50s, the Great Leap Forward. Everybody went into commune and they were really tight all through the 50s until they slowly opened up with Deng Xiaoping or something. I don't know, you want to get into the politics. But Chinese woman, if you want the essence of the beauty of Chinese woman, and you will find it in Zhao Sheng, the great Chinese singer Zhao Sheng that sang in the dance halls of Shanghai in the 1930s. These are the time of the great big band. The big band era, and a beautiful vocalist that sang like a canary. The Chinese loved it, like the little girl voice, and that carried through the dance. So Zhao Sheng, and there's a Zhao Sheng club around the world, and you'll be very surprised when you talk to some of the old Chinese in Hong Kong or Taiwan or China and say, "Do you have any Zhao Sheng music?" And they'll look at you and smile and say yes, and they'll take out the record, their platters or whatever, and you buy one of them and you listen to that, but get the complete set if you can, 30 or so, her best songs. She was married to a Japanese boy, and she lived in Shanghai, and during the turbulent times of the gangsters and the wide open days of the 30s. And I had an uncle that lived there too, and later I followed him a lot. He was a radio operator on a ship. Yeah, go ahead.
And so, how long were you in China? How many years approximately?
Well, I lived in China for a while. This is later on, much later. And then one of my children was born there.
Really? Wow.
But that was later on.
And so how about the Philippines? When did you go there?
The Philippines is I came here in 1959 and was briefly, and then stayed up in the Manila area and took a trip down to Cebu. And in those days they had the old DC-3 planes. And you could grab a flight down there, some $20 or so, and you'd land in Cebu at the old airfield called Lahu, which is right in the center of the city now, by just up from the Ayala Mall. And there were all goat fields and carabao there, and the little boys and girls, they would be picking the tamarang that you make the sinigang soup, and they'd be selling it on the little wooden carts for 5 centavos for a little bun. And it was a beautiful time. Cebu I loved it. There were not too many people there, and very few, not many cars, no motorcycles, and it was a beautiful place. And the girls were very friendly, and there was no real heavy politics. There were no internal strife. The Osmeña family controlled it. They were a dynasty for years. So Cebu was a very beautiful place. This is before the reclamation came in, where President Marcos, through his brother-in-law, they started reclaiming the sea, building up many kilometers, developing the port area all around. But this is way before that, when Cebu had, and I was friends with a very good Filipino, one of the greatest Filipinos I ever met. His name was Father Tropa. Father Tropa, have you heard of Father Tropa? Father Tropa was a legendary man. He would walk like Christ. He had a cape that went down to his feet, and long hair, and a greenish cape. He had shoulders, and the Father Tropa was into world peace and love, and he loved animals. So I lived with Father Tropa in Cebu for a while, and Father Tropa took care of the zoo. It was the Philippine Zoo in Cebu at Old Fort San Pedro. That was created by the Spanish over almost 500 years ago. It's in the down port area of Cebu, and they had an elephant there too. And Father Tropa, he took care of the zoo, and his organization was the Lamplighters. Lamplighters, yes, I think coming back a long time, more than half a century. But Father Tropa, he recognized the beauty of animals and what animals convey to people, and he worked with the poor people of old downtown Cebu around the Santo Niño Cathedral Church, one of the oldest churches in the Philippines. He had his house there, a little hotel down in that area, and I lived with Father Tropa in that area.
I just want to.
And Father Tropa, incidentally, came from Zamboanga, but he was a retired Navy veteran in the U.S. Navy, spent years there. When he got out of that whole horror, took his pension and lived in Cebu and formed the Lamplighters organization. It's an organization of peace and brotherhood all over the world.
Earlier this morning, there was
some of the old timers. They will always know Father Tropa.
Earlier this morning, one of the local guys came by here who was has mental issues. A local person, we all know him, and you gave him some money. And
I give it to him every day.
And that's something. You're a very kind man, and you're a very generous man.
We must help the less fortunate, because to me, in my travels and my life experiences, the most severe, debilitating illness that I have ever encountered is mental illness.
Yeah.
It's above cancer, leprosy, and everything. Because when a person is mentally incapacitated, they can't control their ways, and they become very fragile and very helpless. So if we don't stand up for them and take care of them, then they become. And in the Philippines, sad to say, because of the poverty and their culture, whatever, I don't want to get into it, there's a lacking of compassion to a great degree to recognize the mentally ill, and it should be.
I agree with you 100%. My daughter is autistic, so I know all about this.
So you know about this.
I know a lot about this.
You know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I've lived it.
So you're not against me?
Not at all. Not at all. I do the same thing. I do the same thing. Yeah. So we're on the same.
But I'm ridiculed, and I catch a lot of flack for it, because people say I don't have any brains to give these people, that they can go out, their brother's rich and they can give them food, they have money. I don't care if they come from a family of wealth. If I see a poor individual here, he might be an outcast of that family.
That's right.
And that outcast has to have, he's a human being to me, he's a living entity, and we cannot turn our back, because in any religion, Buddhism, Muhammad, Islam, Christianity, we must take care of the mentally ill.
I agree. Sorry to change the subject. So going back to the Philippines, you've been here all these years, so you're here in Dumaguete.
No, I come and go.
You come and go.
Yes.
And so where do you go? If you're not here, where do you go?
Usually I go to Europe.
Really?
Yeah.
So when's the last time you were in Europe?
Oh, I'd say about a year ago.
A year ago, really? And where did you go?
Well, I go to Northern Europe, usually to Russia.
Oh, I've been there. I've been to St. Petersburg.
Yeah, so you know Nevsky Prospect, and you know the Stockman's department store, and you like St. Petersburg?
I love Russia. I mean, first time I was there was the early 80s during the Cold War, and I stood out because I'm an American, and I was surprised how friendly the Russian people were to me. And it was not this evil state that's out to kill Americans.
Very beautifully
Very
said.
nice people.
Very nice people.
Yeah.
I went there a little earlier. I went there the first time was in the 50s.
Now Stalin was still alive then, right?
Stalin died in 1953, and I was in Germany at that time and went to Russia shortly after that. I went to Belarusia, which was then part of Russia, to a place called Minsk.
Yeah.
And Minsk, and there was a few other cities, but Minsk was where I went, and that's where I met Lee Harvey Oswald.
Really?
Met him there. That was later on in the 60s. I want to say 60, 61-ish, but met Lee there, did not become, we met at an institute that was there, and I belonged to a young youth organization then, which was the Ernst Thalmann youth organization. Ernst Thalmann was a Hamburg dock worker, wonderful man, and he was a union leader on the Hamburg docks, and he took the workers and gave them a better life and led them into negotiations with the shipping. Anyway, he went off to the Spanish Civil War, 1937 to 38, 37 to 36 to 38, and he was the leader of the Ernst Thalmann Brigade. Now, the German brigade, the Ernst Thalmann, the International Brigade, composed of a lot of different...
Nice hat, man. That's a good looking hat on
Yes, it's coming. I know it's coming.
It's almost here.
A Tar Heel's word is sanctified. And the Abraham Lincoln Brigade was the American. We had three brigades there: the Lincoln Brigade, and there were two others. And not getting into that now, I want to touch on Ernst Thalmann. My hat is always off to Ernst Thalmann. He was a wonderful man. He led the Germans, and when they had great charges in the Spanish Civil War, when they were out of ammunition and all, Ernst Thalmann says, fix bayonets, and the German soldiers, they were farm boys, factory workers, laborers, office workers, students, and they went off to make a better world for humanity. And when they went up against the forces of at that time the banking industries and all, against the Franco force, and the Catholic Church was very much against them. Well, Ernst Thalmann, his boys would fix bayonets and charge, and there were great battles around Madrid. They're legendary, but they're blocked out in history. You will hardly get any. You have to research the Spanish Civil War to read about, and you got to read.
But Teddy Roosevelt was involved in that, wasn't he?
No, Teddy Roosevelt was the American president. He was in the
Cuba, right?
Spanish-American War in 1898, and during the Philippine-American War, he was not the president. Slightly, yes.
I didn't know there was a Philippine-American War.
That was one of the most savage wars that was ever fought.
When was that?
The Philippine-American, this man that just left, his good friend that was a commander, an American commander, naval commander, visited my library with his assistants, and he walked out and he said, John, let me borrow this, have this book to borrow and read, and he never came back. He took my book, and the library has been missing that book. It's going on, it's over 5 years now. And this man is a Tar Heel from the state of North Carolina. And I reminded him, I said, you sent him there, you gave him my address, and you were in collusion with this commander, because this man is a veteran of the, and so without his help and assistance, that man would have not gotten in my library. But I did entrust the book to him through this guy. So he left and never came back with the book, and the book left my life. And I don't like to lose a book because I'm a book man. I don't do the computer, and I value my books. And I took my books, many of them here, not 75% I had to leave behind, but I took a good many here. And one of these books was called the Philippine-American War. It was one of the most savage wars that was ever fought.
And when was this?
And it was the precursor to America getting involved in the Vietnam War, jungle warfare in
So
Vietnam.
in what year are we talking about?
We're talking about 1899 to 1904.
Okay.
Now, some say it went into '05.
So the Philippines and Americans are fighting-
Professor from University of the Philippines, Diliman. Very few would go into that. I attended a beautiful lecture a few years ago here in Dumaguete by a lecturer from the University of the Philippines, and he said yes, it did go into '05. There was still skirmishing, but the Philippine-American War was a savage war, and it was a war in which we lost over 30,000 American soldiers. It's completely untold, hidden, and wiped off the pages of history. You, as an American that grew up in the United States, and I assume you went to a pretty knowledgeable school district. Was it California you grew up?
No, I went Cincinnati.
Okay, in Cincinnati, it's a good school district, and you never did in-depth work. You probably never studied one page on the Philippine-American.
That's right, not one page, not
But
one
you did
word.
have a few pages on the Spanish-American.
Yes, yeah.
But nothing on the Philippines.
Yeah.
Now, it was intentionally done that way, and I will tell you why, Mark. Because the United States, it was their first incursion into imperialism in the early part of the last century, and it took place. Very bitter debates were going on in Washington at that time, and the great adversaries to the imperialist regime that wanted to go out of America and abroad and put our reaches all over were the party that was in power. And opposing them, the greatest opposition was Mark Twain
Oh yeah, I love Mark
and
Twain.
James Fenimore Cooper, who wrote Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Lincoln. Now, thank you. Now, getting into that, they went to Washington and said, they addressed the Senate and they addressed Congress. They said, do not take over the Spanish Empire's possessions and go to the Philippines. Do not go to Guam. Do not go to Puerto Rico. Do not go blah, 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 blah. And they did that. And Teddy Roosevelt, his legacy carried into Taft in the early part of the century, 1901, 1902. And then, I don't know what month it was, but the first great battle was up in Manila at the Battle of Caloocan. Caloocan, Manila. Caloocan City is in Manila, just the suburbs of Manila, and that's where, under Emilio Aguinaldo, the Filipino government forces organized, and they met the Americans in combat. They said, you came here to chase the Spanish out and give us our freedom, but you remained and you're not going out. We want you out. And the American generals under Dewey and these people said, no, we're here. We're going to colonize. We're working now here. You will be an American possession. So the Portsmouth Treaty of New Hampshire gave America the Philippines for $21 million, I think. They bought it from the Spanish. I think it was $21 million. But it was a tragedy, a travesty injustice, because the Filipinos, they called them our little brown brother at that time. And we came in here with our armies, and we mobilized in the States. The Spanish-American War ended in 1898. In 1899, we pushed into the Philippines, and we stayed here until 1946. So, during the Spanish-American War, President Duterte, when he took office a couple of years ago, he said there were about 1,600,000 to 1 million Filipinos killed. Our official registry in America carries it about 250,000. American soldiers, we've never disclosed it. It's hidden to this day. They assume that it was about 30,000, but it could be more. I have been to remote spots in the Philippines, glades in a jungle somewhere. I can tell you right here in Bohol. I visited there, and a Boholano said, John, when I was a little boy, my grandfather took me here. There's about 12 Americans buried in this place. They were killed on an ambush during the Filipino-American War, and they're buried in Bohol. And He showed me this place. There's no marking. They've told grave registration. They never came. They're not interested in it.
I can't believe I've never heard of this. I'm a pretty well-read person. I'm very interested in
I'm
history.
not
I've
knocking
never
York,
heard of this
New York, Ohio, Cincinnati. I come from a school district which is a pretty good, one of the best in the United States. It's called New York City School District, and I never had one page taught to me about the Philippine-American War. I had about 3 pages on the Spanish, but you will never hear about it because the Americans have whitewashed it off the map.
Yeah, we were basically told that America freed the Philippines from the Spanish. We were the,
But
that
this
was
is all
basically that's the only
propaganda.
thing we were told.
This is a war where, for the first time, a farm boy from Iowa would be walking in a marketplace, and they grab the guy, and they said, "All right, we're going to give you the treatment." They bury him alive, the old Chinese style, in a box down below, buried alive, and he goes to his maker buried alive. That's the worst torture. Then the other torture was bury him up to the neck in the dirt, and then you take Filipino syrup from the sugar cane, and you take it and you kick open his mouth, and you put a piece of wood there, so he's like this. And you lead it into the jungle right there, and you take the honey and you lead it into the jungle, and the ants come out of the jungle and they come to this boy and they start eating in here from the eyes, the nose, the brain, and all. This was the Philippine-American War. They don't want you to know about these things. Horrible tortures were committed by both sides. This good commander walked out of my house with the book on the Philippine-American War. But to read these things, you have to know what type of a war it was. It was the precursor to the Vietnam War. This war, but they never taught the Americans about it. In all of America, in all the world, there's one museum, and I searched it out. It's at Cheyenne, Wyoming. It's at, I think it's Warren Air Force Base, Cheyenne, Wyoming. That's a high-tech, it's a nuclear Air Force base. And to get on there, it's not easy, but I was on the base, and I wanted to go in a snowstorm coming in from Wyoming. I was traveling across Wyoming, and we were snowed in the armory. And when I got to Cheyenne, I went to the only museum in the world that's dedicated to the Philippine-American War. They have uniformed soldiers in uniform, dressed as they were with the leg, everything. And the opposition, the Filipino guerrilla, we call them bandits, insurrectados, but it's changed now. They were called now, not insurrectados, they've changed the definition, freedom fighter, no, there's a new term I can't, but up until just a year or two ago, they were called terrorists, insurrectados, bandits like that. But now that's been changed. And the bells that were taken from the Balanhiga, you're familiar with the Balanhiga bells?
No.
Okay. In Samar, eastern Samar, which is the poorest area of the Philippines, because the Pacific typhoons rage in. They come in there with 200-mile-an-hour winds. Yolanda and all these killed 10,000 people in Leyte. Well, in the lower part of eastern Samar, there's a little town down there called Balanhiga. Now, go to your YouTube and order a book. It's called Ordeal in Samar. And it was written by, the author is, I'll think of it in the name, but just Ordeal in Samar. It describes the incident that took place September the 28th, 1901, when Wyoming cowboys, tough American soldiers, some of them were Native American, off the plains of the West. These are tough boys. They're not from Cincinnati or New York. These were cowheads. And they knew, and they were on the Boxer Rebellion. They were in China, relieving the international legations at Beijing, Peking, we'll call it Peking, 1900. I've got a good book on it. The siege of 55 Days at Peking was, Charlton Heston was in the movie. Get a little information. But the Wyoming cowboys were fighting in the fight at Peking, China, and a lot of them were killed. When the war was over there, they were brought to the Philippines because they were tough boys and they wanted to subdue the insurrection that was now taking place. This is the year 1901. But they were brought here about 1900 after the war, 1901. They were bivouacked in Manila. Up in Manila, they were bivouacked at a camp. And the head general of the Philippines in the American was called Blackjack, it was called Howling Jacob Smith. Jacob Smith was a murdering motherfucking general, but he was the head of the American Army in Manila. In 1890, in Wounded Knee, South Dakota, was the last, I believe, one of the last battles with First Nation American Indians with the American cavalry. On a winter morning, the American cavalry surrounded this Indian camp, and the chief was, I can't think of the chief, an Indian chief, and most of the braves were all out because they knew the cavalry was looking for it. There were women, children, sleeping children, and elderly people, and the American Army posted machine guns, Gatling guns around the camp, and then opened fire on these sleeping teepees. And as they came out, they were machine gunned down. This is Wounded Knee, South Dakota. Jacob Smith was a young American Army officer that was there at that battle. And I think he received, I don't want to say, but I don't know if he got the Congressional Medal of Honor. There were 6 American soldiers, I believe, that received the highest honor of valor that we can give in America, and they machine gunned these sleeping children, and they were lying in the snow. There's many pictures, and Reed D. Brown, D-E-E Brown, she wrote a book called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee.
I've heard of that book.
Now, get that book, read that, and it'll give you the whole description on that. But fast forward now, 1890, and now we're 1901, Philippines. Jacob Smith, who was a 30-year veteran of the American Army, a decorated veteran, received valor. These people, it's the only time I think that 6 of them got, and they machine gunned these with Gatling guns. The bravery of these guys, they were these half-naked Indians. Now, anyway, Jacob Smith is now the head general up in Manila. And on September the 28th, 1901, at 6:30 in the morning, church bells started ringing at this church. And in eastern Samar, at the town called Balanhiga. Now, the bells were ringing loud. And on Sunday morning, if you're an American veteran, I assume, or you've never been in everybody sleeps in. There's no you sleep in. There's no revelry. You can sleep all day if you want. Nobody will bother you. 90% of the guys were sleeping. 10 to 15% were at a long table having coffee, getting ready to have some breakfast. There was a big coffee pot right there. The big red-faced American sergeant was preparing the coffee. And on one side of the table coming was a group of a column of Filipinos. And on the other side of the table was another column. Now, like the Indian Wars, they follow the practice of the old Indian Wars. The sleeping soldiers would sleep in tents there, and they would stack their rifles in front of the tent, right?
Yeah, I've seen that before. We have pictures.
That was the typical of the
Right.
Indian. So what happened was one column came to cut the sleeping soldiers off from the rifles. The other column came at these soldiers that were having breakfast, having coffee. And now, if you go there, I've been there, I love the girl, Faye Abelardo is her name, I believe, Abelardo. She's the curator of the museum in Eastern Samar, and you will talk to her, and they have created, the Philippine government has erected a museum there and a building, and as you'll read it in the book, I told you before, I gave you the name of it, this column hit the Americans at the table with bolos. They came at them with bolos, and they hatcheted them there. The other table got the guys in the tents. As they started screaming, they were on them at the mess. They took the big sergeant, boloed him, and put him head first down in his big, huge coffee pot. He was cooking down with the coffee head first, and they boloed, and his fighting was there, and the fighting hand to hand, bolos and all. Now these are tough Wyoming cowboys, a lot of them. They're not. I have a very big. I had to just give.
Yeah.
Let me give you the last thing on that last issue.
Okay,
One
go
second, Dave.
Just 1 second. I come by your house just.
Go.
They attacked this base, this Balanhiga base.
Yeah.
There's a church there, nice church, and there's beautiful bells. There were 3 bells there, made by the Spanish, cast in the 1870s or 60s in Spain. Beautiful big bells, and they rang very violently at 6:30 in the morning, and it signaled the attack. And suddenly, these columns came, led by General Lucban, one of the best commanders of the Philippine forces, the Philippine Army. And he led these people in, and they started boloing and cutting apart the Americans. Now these soldiers, these Wyoming cowboys, woke up, and a group of them ran into the church to escape. And it was hand-to-hand fighting. They had about 3 or 4 rifles, and they're shooting, but they were being overpowered. And their commander, who was a West Point commander, a young officer, captain or major, I forget, McConnell, I think, he jumped out the window and started running to the beach to get in the bunker. But they bowled him to death on the right out. The other guys fought hand-to-hand to the last man until a few of them fought their way out, and one of the bravest was named Wingo, W-I-N-G-O. An American, I heard, Indian, cowboy of mixed blood. They ran to the beach. There were 3 bunker boats there. The others ran into the jungle, which was the worst mistake because the Filipinos know the jungle. It's like the back of their hand. So they disappeared into history. The 3 that went to the beach, 5 got into 2 bunkers. And they got in the bunkers, and here these guys, they're not sailors, they're infantry, they're army. And they're paddling out, and then Wingo says, "Stop, don't go anymore. We got to get the colors at the flagpole in the center of the court, the grounds there." And I said, "You're crazy, you can't go back. There's all these Filipinos they got." He said, "I'm going back." Wingo jumps out of the boat, waist deep, and he runs ashore, and they're chopping him and cutting him, and he dodges, and he gets to the flagpole. He climbs the motherfucking flagpole, and he rips the colors down, the American flag, or their flag, or I think it was theirs. Yeah. And he gets the flag, and he comes down, and they're cutting him, and he's taking cuts and hits, and he actually makes it back to the water. And the guy says, "We can't wait any longer. They're coming out in boats." And he says, "Wait for me. I can't swim. I'm a cowboy." And he drowns and dies there, holding the colors. And the 2 bunkers go out. This is 2 guys, let's say 4 people. They followed the coast, and then one of them said, we're going to split up, and we're going out into the open sea. And the other one says, "We'll follow the coast." Now the Filipinos were very smart. They copied the old Indian war tactics of the Americans. They started using smoke blankets, a fire. And they said, they signaled to the next barangay, "America, get these devils, they're coming up, and kill them. We got them down, don't let them." So they were waiting up, the towns up ahead along the coast, they were never heard from again. 2 days later, a day and a half later, there's one bunker across the ocean and comes into Cebu, into Cebu, half dead, cut. They said, "What happened?" They said, "They killed all our friends. They massacred us." And they said, "Who?" He said, "The guerrillas, these savages." So I said, "Well, take a rest and we'll go back tomorrow." He says, "No, we'll go back now. We can't let our friends, they're dead now." I said, "All right, give them 4 or 5 hours rest." These guys went to sleep, cut through, bleed, and they went back with the army with a couple of hundred men in Basi, And they went back. It was just smoking ruins there. Everything, nobody was there. Dead bodies of the American soldiers. The Filipino dead were gone, and just burning. And the bells were there. The church was there. The commander says, burn the church down. And he says, take those bells and let's go. They took the bells, they left, they burned everything, and they went back to Cebu. When the commander in Manila heard about this, Jacob Smith, he says, I'm not telling you, I'm ordering you, the whole army here in Manila, this army, I want you to go back down there to Samar, eastern Samar, and I want you to kill every living thing over 9 years old. And the more you kill, you please me. But don't make me angry. Don't displease me and not kill. I want you to kill every and burn.